In 1935, U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt established the Works Progress Administration. The new agency's task was to find jobs for millions of Americans who had lost their jobs during the Great Depression. Among these people were representatives of the creative professions. They became participants in the Federal Writers Project, which produced the collection of former slaves' stories between 1936 and 1938. Hundreds of writers interviewed more than 20,300 former slaves from 17 states. These conversations are posted on the website of the Library of Congress. I decided to publish edited versions of some of these conversations. George Young, Alabama.
They didn't teach us anything, and didn't let us learn anything ourselves. If they saw us learning to read and write, they would chop off our hands. They didn't let us go to church either. Sometimes we would run away and pray together in an old house with a dirt floor. There we rejoiced and shouted, and no one heard us because the dirt floor muffled the sound, and one person stood at the door. Some put their heads in a bucket and prayed that way, while someone else kept watch so that the overseer wouldn't see. If they found out, they beat us. We were not allowed to visit anyone, and I saw Jim Dawson, Iverson Dawson's father, tied to 4 stakes. They laid him on his stomach and stretched his arms out to the sides, tying one arm to one stake and the other to another. His legs were also stretched out and tied to the stakes. Then they began to beat him with a board, like the kind used for roofing. The black people came there at night and carried him home on a sheet, but he did not die. He was accused of going to a neighboring plantation at night. At 9 o'clock, we all had to be home. The foreman would come and shout, "Lights out! Lights out! Everyone to their homes and lock the doors." And if anyone didn't go, they were beaten.
Millie Ivins, Arkansas.
We had the best master and mistress in the world. They were Christians and taught us to live as Christians. Every Sunday morning, the master would call all of us Negroes into the house and sing, pray, and read the Bible to us. The master taught us not to be bad. He taught us to be good. He told us never to steal, never to lie, and never to do anything bad. He said, "What you sow, you will reap. Sow once, and you will reap twice." I remembered this from childhood and never forgot it.
Tom McAlpin, Alabama.
No, sir, I wasn't whipped, except once. It happened when the master told me to keep the pigs out of the cornfield, and if they went in, I'd get what was coming to me. So, boss, there was this one old boar that I couldn't scare away. So I took a needle and sewed his eyes shut. Of course, I was just a little black hooligan and didn't understand what I was doing. So I sewed the boar's eyelids shut so he couldn't see anything. It helped, but when the master found out, he whipped me so badly that I still remember it. Boss, that was the only lesson I needed in my whole life. It helped me.
Isam Morgan, Alabama.
We Negroes lived very well indeed. There was plenty of food. We only had to ask, and the master did everything. We loved possum with potatoes most of all. We hunted at night with a large bag and a pack of hounds, which quickly drove the possum up a tree. Then stood around and barked. If the tree was small, we shook it. And if it was big, one of the Negroes climbed up and caught old Mr. Possum. In general, it was a lot of fun to track down a possum or a raccoon. Raccoons are more interesting, but they are not as tasty as opossums. Once I saw a cornered raccoon bite off the tip of a dog's nose. The master never beat us. He just told us what to do, and if we didn't do it, he called us over and said, in his special way. How many times do I have to tell you to do as you're told? That's all he said. And believe me, ma'am, he could look at you in such a way that you would jump. When he bought a new slave who wasn't used to doing as he was told, the master quickly dealt with him.
Nicey Pugh, Alabama.
I remember white woman beat up one black man for setting his dog on a good milking cow. He killed her for that. I've never seen such a despicable man. I'll never forget what the white people did to him after he was tried. They tied him to a horse and dragged him through the whole town. Then made him walk barefoot on sharp stones, his feet covered in blood, as if they had been cut with a knife. They didn't give him any water that day and kept him in the scorching sun while they prepared to hang him. When everything was ready, they put him on a platform, stripped him, and started throwing stones at him. They threw gravel in his eyes and broke his ribs with huge cobblestones. Then they put a rope around his neck and pulled so hard that his eyes popped out of their sockets. I understood that death was a relief for him. But that's how it was. White gentlemen, life was happy for black people back then. Sometimes I want to go back there. I can still see that icebox with butter, milk, and cream. I can hear the stream babbling over the rocks with willows above it. I can hear the turkeys gobbling in the yard, the chickens running around and bathing in the dust. I see the backwater near our house and the cows that came to drink and cool their feet in the shallow water. I was born into slavery, but I was never a slave. I worked for good people. Is that called slavery, white gentlemen?
Frank Smith, Alabama.
When the Great War began, the mistress took her children and me, and we moved to some place where there was still a court. They called it Culpeper or something like that. We lived next to a large hotel where General Lee and his soldiers stayed, and they had the most luxurious uniforms I had ever seen. They were real gentlemen, and my mistress allowed me to serve them when I was not needed at home. I cleaned General Lee's boots, and he always gave me a coin and said, "Now that's beautiful." He stood straight and dignified, spoke little, and walked back and forth on the gallery, while his orderlies brought him telegrams from Bull Run, where our men were fighting the Yankees. When the war came close to us, we went to Lynchburg, but the mistress was very nervous about the war. So when I broke her ivory-handled table knife and forgot to tell her, she slapped me so hard that my head almost came off, and she sold me. My new master was not like my old masters, so I ran away and joined the Yankee Army. We marched with General Sherman all the way to Atlanta. Then they turned back and marched to Chattanooga and beyond until they reached Nashville. They gave me a uniform but no weapon. I fought with a frying pan.
Stepney Underwood, Alabama.
They were good people, those Underwoods. I remember they thought I was funny like a monkey. My master laughed himself silly, and when there were guests, they always said,
Where's Stepney? We want him to dance for us.
I did such tricks for them. Once, when I had finished my work, I quietly slipped out and went to another plantation to see my mother. Halfway there in the woods, I ran into two patrolmen. They stopped me and said,
"Hey, whose are you?"
Master Jim Johnston's, I said.
"Then what are you doing here?"
They asked. closing in on me to grab me. I decided not to waste any more time talking to them because I realized they were about to beat me up. I ran as fast as I could through the woods like a scared rabbit with the patrolman behind me. I knew those two guys wouldn't catch up with me, but I also knew I was in for a beating at home. However, I didn't go home that night. I stayed in the forest and built a small fire. I lay down under a plane tree to gather my thoughts and go home. I heard pumas growling and wild cats howling somewhere far away in the forest, and I really wanted to see my mother. Soon, I fell asleep right there on the moss. In the morning, I woke up terribly hungry, and when the sun rose over the hill, I heard someone pushing through the bushes. It was the master, the overseer, and some other people. I ran toward them and shouted with all my might, "Master Jim, I'm here." He approached with a very frowning face, and the overseer had a whip in his hands.
"You curly-haired Negro devil,"
said the master.
"I'll show you how to run away from home. Let's go home. I'll feed you breakfast and give you decent clothes. I have guests coming today, and here you are in the woods instead of dancing."
And then the master smiled, as if I hadn't done anything wrong.
"You probably want to go to your mother, poor little Negro. Well, I'll have to buy her, you little devil. Now let's go home."
W.L. Boss, North Carolina.
Jesus, Son of God, I remember when I was little, about 10 years old, slave traders would pass through Newton. They were driving slaves to market. They always stopped at our place. The poor things were freezing to death. It was always at the end of December, so the slaves would be ready for sale on January 1st. Often 4 or 5 of them would be chained together. They never had enough clothes to keep themselves even slightly warm. The women wore thin dresses, petticoats, and undergarments. Icicles formed on the edges of their dresses as they were driven forward like sheep to be sheared. They never had shoes. They ran across the icy ground just like that. The traders were on horses and drove the poor Negroes before them. When the Negroes froze, they were forced to run to keep warm. The traders spent the night in a hotel, while the Negroes were herded into huts like pigs. All night long, you could hear them moaning and praying. The gates were always closed, and there was a guard standing nearby. He would shoot anyone who tried to escape. Many black women had children by white fathers. The women understood that it was better not to argue. Then they made those very children who had their blood running through their veins slaves too. If the mistress had found out, she would have started a revolution. But the mistresses usually didn't know. White men wouldn't tell, and black women were afraid. So they lived like that, hoping that it wouldn't last forever.
Tempe Herndon, Durham, North Carolina.
When I grew up, I married Exeter Durham. He belonged to Snipes Durham, who had a large plantation in the neighboring county. We had a real wedding. We were married on the large porch of the master's house. Master George slaughtered a pig, and Mrs. Betsy told Georgiana, the cook, to make a huge wedding cake covered with white frosting, with figures of the bride and groom holding hands in the middle. A table was set up under the trees in the yard, and it was a feast for all. All the Negroes were invited, and Master George poured each of them a glass. The wedding was just right. I wore a white dress, white shoes, and white gloves up to my elbows, and Mrs. Betsy made me a veil out of a white net curtain. When she played the wedding march on the piano, Exeter and I walked down the aisle and up the steps to the altar that Mrs. Betsy had designed. I had never seen such a beautiful altar. Next to a red rose bush, it could be my son's up on that altar. She set up tables with flowers and white candles. She laid a linen sheet on the floor for us to stand on, and there was also a white pillow to kneel on. Exeter made me a wedding ring with his pocket knife from a large red button. He made it so round and polished it so well that it looked like a silk ribbon tied around my finger. Yes, it was a beautiful ring. I wore it for 50 years, and then it wore out and became so thin that I lost it somehow while doing the laundry.
Mary Armstrong, Texas.
I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. My mother belonged to William Cleveland and Polly Cleveland, and they were the meanest white people in the world. They beat their slaves constantly. That old Polly, she was a natural devil, and she beat my sister, who was 9 months old, just a baby, to death. She took off her diaper and started beating my little sister until she bled, just 'cause she was crying like any baby, and my sister died. I'll never forget it, but I got even with Polly. Here's how it happened. I was 10 years old, and I belonged to Miss Olivia, Polly's daughter. One day, that witch came to the house where Miss Olivia lived after she got married and tried to whip me in the yard. I picked up a rock the size of half your fist and hit her right in the eye, knocking it out, and said, "This is for my dead sister." She screamed so loud you could probably hear her 5 miles away. But when I told Miss Olivia, she said, "Well, Mama finally got her lesson."